I'm super excited to introduce Samita Mukhopadhyay and Kate Harding, the editors of Nasty Women, Feminism, Resistance, and Revolution in Trump's America. Samhita is the Senior Editorial Director of Culture and Identities at Mic and former Executive Director of the award-winning blog Feministing.com. Kate was a distinguished visiting writer at Cornell College and is the author of Asking for It, The Alarming Rise of Rape Culture and What We Can Do About It. My favorite bit of her bio that you can find in the back of the book is it says, quote, "She is feminist as fuck." End quote. Their book asks super important, topical, important questions that impact just so many people. And given the shocking results of the 2016 presidential election, buoyed as it was by misogyny, racism, and xenophobia, it asks, how can women unite as a political class to bring the fight for one another and to support each other? In their book, they collected essays from 23 leading feminist writers to help answer those questions. And their book is already garnering a ton of praise. Kirkus Reviews, in just one example, described it as strong, thoughtful, angry voices ring out for resistance, empathy, and solidarity. Tonight, they'll be in conversation with Nicole Chung and Mary Catherine Nagel, who both contributed essays to the book. Nicole's an editor at the Catapult and former managing editor at The Toast. And Mary, once she joins us, is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and is a partner at Pipestem Law PC, where she works to protect tribal sovereignty. So without further ado, please help me welcome them all to Politics in Prose.
Thank you.
Is this on? This is on. We have some really good T-shirts up at the front.
I was just going to say the same thing.
This is what a feminist looks like. America needs nasty women.
We got behind that. We've got misogyny kills.
Yes.
Nasty women unite, and a Make America Kind Again button. So we've got the best view of all the slogans right here. I almost wore my Nasty Woman T-shirt tonight. I did not. So
this is our first event, so we're really excited.
Right, thank you all for coming.
Yes.
It's so exciting to see and so many innocent faces that I love, and so this is really a thrill to be able to start here and start in this bookstore, which I also love, and which is a bulwark against the political reality right now. So I'm Kate. That's Samita.
Yeah.
We started putting this together a couple of days after the election. And we have not, again, it's our first time, so we haven't really gotten our little banter down of how we tell this story. But basically, Samita had written an essay that she was going to file for Mic, where she was working at the time, about what it meant to have our first woman president. And she ended up instead doing a video in which she cried about not getting to publish that essay. And I saw that essay, or I saw that video and said, I have one that's 3/4 written too, that I thought I was just going to have to plug in a couple paragraphs on election night, and then I didn't. I was like, we should do an anthology of all of those essays about what it meant to have our first woman president that none of us can publish now. That's not exactly what this is, but that was the genesis of it. So,
Yeah. So, and I think we both simultaneously had the idea on Facebook. And Kate and I have known each other for a long time, at least from the internet. And Kate was the co-editor for the Book of Jezebel. And I was like, we need to do this now, and we need to do it tomorrow. And I think for me, and I know for many people, the night of the election, I was working in a newsroom, and so I had. We had prepared for a kind of Hillary win, and then I was going to go out and party. So I was at the Javits Center, and I was ready to go out and party. And then all of it became the feminist zombie apocalypse there when we realized what was going to happen. I can joke about it now, it's after months of therapy. But, after I realized that, I had to go back to the office, we had to rewrite everything. And that's pretty much every newsroom in America. Nobody knew that was coming. And so... and I think our first phone call, we were it was both we should do this, and we were so angry. It was we were just yelling and realized that one of the things that we didn't want to get lost in the conversation that was happening was the role that kind of identity and identity politics in general played in this election. And that, there was and the train is never late for even progressives to be oh, shit, we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have banked on a woman. We shouldn't have banked on the Blackfoot. We should, And so I was we're going to need to like counter this narrative immediately. And for our own mental health, we're going to need to work on something that doesn't make us go crazy. And so that's really, I think, where the spirit of it came from, of like showcasing a really diverse set of voices. And as you go through the book, they contradict each other. Like, I mean, the left is fragmented right now, and that we all have a lot of different perspectives on what groups should be prioritized and what does it look like to truly prioritize identity politics in, and the question of gender in kind of how we build power politically. And I guess I can talk about my essay a little bit, and then if you guys want to talk about your essays in it. So yeah, my essay really tackles the idea and kind of goes against the idea of us having to get away from identity politics, and that, as a progressive kind of cause, we really need to think about how do we centralize our most marginalized voices, not try to kind of create a uniform American identity. Belle does not like my politics.
That's right. Oh, Peanut. She's got the most marginalized voice in the room. Look at her.
It's true. So that's really, and in thinking about, knowing it's a delicate balance, understanding that people have all kinds of legitimate reasons to have the politics they have and the beliefs they have, and how that kind of played out, at least for the Democrats in the 2016 election. But that said, we really do ourselves damage by trying to move away from what makes, to me, progressives great, which is centralizing difference and always recognizing disenfranchised voices and like finding ways to bring equality and like elevate those voices. So.
Yeah, and we so it leads in, we actually didn't write an introduction together because when our editor looked at what we were turning in, Samita's essay on we do need identity politics and here's why turned out to be kind of a great introduction. And then I went from there into 150 years of, and also gender, because it's so important, but also to be putting gender at the center of everything we're actually doing with this anthology. It just seems like it can be sidelined so easily. And we were talking, I was just as a break from my rage, was listening to a book which happened to be about sort of the history of everything leading up to the writing of the Feminist Mystique. So just remembering.
That's her fun reading.
Yeah, it's my break. And just being so overwhelmed by the sense of how cyclical it all is, how every single thing I'm fighting with somebody about on Twitter is something that people were fighting with each other about in groups in the 60s. And that, and just the older I get, the more I realize how recent all of that was. And so I go back to, I happen to be doing research for a different project on a lot of the suffragists in the late 19th century, and actually just right after the Civil War, where a lot of them had said, okay, we're putting women's issues on hold for the war while we fight for emancipation. That's the most important thing. And then emancipation happened, and then all of these white guys who had been kind of leading the progressive movement were like, okay, women, can you just hang on one more minute? And some of them were like, no. And there are so many things coming at it as a 21st century feminist who wants to approach it intersectionally, where those women were white women and they were a nightmare on race. They also were living with a level of oppression that, fortunately, I don't have to deal with anymore, and I'm still pissed off all the time, every day. And so just trying to kind of get my head around, letting them be whole people who messed up a lot of things and also worked so hard, and just that sense that Samita and I were talking about the last line of my essay, that looking at Hillary Clinton, looking at Susan B. Anthony, and everything in between, we still haven't gotten a woman there. That's what was killing me on the night of the election, was just not only that I was a big Hillary supporter and I was just so sad that that's it, she's not getting to do this, but I was just there's not another woman on deck. I mean, there are people we're talking about, Gillibrand, Kamala Harris. I'm hoping for all of them, but just in that moment, it was there certainly is nobody who has that breadth of experience, that, had been working on it so assiduously for so long. And it's just our bench was this deep, and now the one person who was on it is gone. And so, yeah, so that's what I was thinking about, the fact that we are in 2016 at this point, and we still have not gotten a woman all the way there. And we are still so underrepresented throughout politics, throughout business. And just talking about, like, kind of coming to the realization that, like, a lot of these women that I admire from the past, or even people who are older than me right now, what they've done is they've worked their whole life for it and not really seen the goals that they were working for. And maybe that's what I'm doing too. Like, and so in some ways it's kind of a midlife crisis thing for me too, that I'm just finally like, oh yeah, I'm getting into my 40s now and realizing that, like, there are doors that have closed already. And that could be one of them. And I think this is Mary Catherine who just walked in. Hi, if you want to just come on right up. Mary Catherine Nagel, everyone. Woohoo! Very nice to meet you. So get yourself settled. And we're just each kind of talking for 5 minutes about our essay, and I've probably been talking for like an hour, so I will hand it over to Nikki, actually.
My name's Nicole Chung. I was very honored to be asked to be in this anthology. I didn't actually think I had anything to write when I got the email. I tried to talk you out of asking me, if you'll remember. So
She did.
I did. I was like,
nope.
It was too much. So I was a Hillary supporter. I am a Hillary supporter. Anybody would have had my vote against Trump. But it was really my daughter, my like 9-year-old daughter, 8 when this like never-ending election had started, who sort of brought me into that. I had not really fully realized how meaningful it would be to her, and I will never forget like her shining face the night Hillary clinched the nomination. She pointed at the television and she beamed at me, and I had been like, of course I'll support Hillary. I'm happy to do this. But like that moment almost made me like weep, and I really wasn't expecting it. And I just remember letting her stay up late on election night and thinking like, she's gonna watch history being made. Like that's what's gonna happen. I had a bottle of champagne in the fridge, like a lot of people probably, that has not been opened. And she finally conked out and went to bed, and I said I'd wake her up if Hillary won, and she just kept sleeping. So after the election, I think the hardest thing for me first as a parent was just helping her make sense of that. You know, she was aware of a lot more than I thought she'd be, and you know, helping her deal with that and deal with her anger and deal with my anger for her, and not just for her, obviously, but for all of us and our kids, the next generation, who deserve better than this, right? And so I just really felt like that was all I could deal with for like the immediate aftermath of the election. But I am also a transracial adoptee, so my entire family is white. And I had talked a lot with them before the election about it, pretty frankly, sort of really begging, honestly begging, for them not to vote for him and for them to see kind of our perspective. Like as a woman of color, as an adoptee, as a woman raising non-white children, one with a disability, you know, all of these stakes just felt very high for my family and obviously for so many people. And so I wrote this essay for Nasty Women, and it was really a much more personal essay than I had intended, and I worried it would be really out of place in the collection, but it's really about sort of those relationships that we have, like still have, with people who disagree with us pretty virulently, and sort of what to do and what your obligation is and how you reach out, if you reach out, you know, what do you have the capacity for? Even if they don't change or do exactly what you want, are there incremental ways to bring them forward? And in a way that doesn't feel patronizing, right, or too alienating. So after the election, I was just talking with so many friends who were in the exact same boat. Like maybe they weren't adopted like I was, but they had very conservative family, or I was talking to a lot of people of color and multiracial friends who had white family like I do. And just like, how do you get them to see, like, what are the limits of empathy in these relationships that mean everything? What are the limits of solidarity? Like what can you live with in terms of allyship or lack of? And what's your obligation, you know, as these are people in your life that you know and care about. So that's really what the essay is about. It's the last essay in the book, and it's very personal, and it's very much about sort of those relationships and how you try to bring people along if you can, and, you know, try to, I guess, build allies before it's too late. So that's my piece.
Hi. Thanks so much, and so sorry to be late. I was actually working at a theater here in D.C. on a play of mine, so I was a little late getting over here from the theater. But Sovereignty, which opens on January 24th at Arena Stage, if anyone wants to go see it. And actually, what's crazy is I wrote that play long before anyone ever imagined President Trump would even be running for president. And, it's just so interesting, I guess, for lack of a better word, to now see that play in the context of today. And just to let you know, Andrew Jackson's a character. And all of a sudden, Andrew Jackson is really resonating, right?
Yes.
With a lot of people. And which does tie into my essay. Because I kind of bring that up. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation. And so I'm a survivor of a moment in American history where dehumanizing people became very dangerous. I think it's always dangerous to dehumanize people because usually when someone's being dehumanized, it is for a very violent purpose, right? It's, even when it happens with, you see school children dehumanizing each other, it's because someone taught them to do that who was trying to gain a very violent, there's always this thing behind it that within our structures of power that has an end to it, that usually what we're trying to achieve is some sort of, whether it's slavery or mass incarceration or genocide. I mean, these big things they are only possible if you dehumanize the people who are the targets of them. And Andrew Jackson certainly was a part of that. And he wasn't the only one, right? I mean, the Indian Removal Act, the Trails of Tears, his defiance, of the Supreme Court's decision in Worcester v. Georgia would not have been possible without the people who supported him, or, the governors who wanted to get the Indians out of the Southeast and therefore supported his Indian Removal Act. And just trying to, so for me, from my perspective, is, stepping back and realizing, yes, Donald Trump has done, I think, some things that I think are evil, right? And tried to and said things to dehumanize Americans and people in our human family, and that's very troubling. But stepping back and comparing him to other presidents in our U.S. history, I think, is actually very helpful because he's not the first one to do it. He didn't come out of a vacuum. It's really no accident that we elected him, right? And so understanding where he comes from, I think, will help us. I don't know if it makes the present circumstances less painful. I think that, that pain that especially many of our communities, I know for tribal nations, there's a lot of fear right now. One of the questions I was asked is, what's going to happen with the Violence Against Women Act? In 2013, Congress and President Barack Obama restored a piece of the criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians that the Supreme Court took away in its 1978 Oliphant decision. So, if you look back during Andrew Jackson's time, at that time, my great-great-great-grandfather was the president, the speaker of our tribal council, and he passed a law in 1825, signed his name on it, the rest of the council voted for it, outlawing the rape of a woman on Cherokee lands. And we prosecuted anyone. Didn't matter your race, your nationality, whatever. You came out of Cherokee lands, you raped a woman, you'd be prosecuted by Cherokee Nation. A lot's happened since 1825, right? But in 1832, we won Worcester v. Georgia, and the Supreme Court said, no, Georgia, you don't get to exercise criminal jurisdiction on Cherokee Nation lands. Only Cherokee Nation can do that. And in 1978, the Supreme Court took away that inherent criminal jurisdiction that our tribal nations have over anyone who comes onto our land. So for Native women today, our Native women experience rates of sexual assault, murder, and domestic violence higher than any other population in the United States. And the Department of Justice has, according to their statistics, reported that the majority of these violent crimes committed against tribal citizens, American Indians, are committed by non-Indians. So we know that the majority of the crimes committed against our people are committed by people that the Supreme Court says we don't have jurisdiction over. I think that's obviously part of the reason why the rates are so high. For a lot of people that are non-native living on or near a reservation, they know where they can go to rape women with impunity, and they do. And so the restoration of tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians in the Violence Against Women Act is a profound, profound victory for Native women. And it has to be understood as such. Right? For the first time in American history, the federal government didn't take away tribal jurisdiction, it restored it. And, I think there is a fear of what will President Trump do with that. And I was there on March 7th, 2013, when President Obama signed VAWA into law. I don't know if anyone else here was in the room for that signing ceremony, but it was powerful. It was really powerful. It was really powerful, too, because I mean, it was a moment of real inclusivity, I think. I mean, I think, I'm not saying that that legislation included everyone, but rights had been added for LGBTQ, immigrant communities, Native women who are almost always left out. And I just think looking out in the audience of everyone who was there at the signing ceremony and seeing President Obama and what he had to say in that moment, and you know, it was like, not only is this a real moment for tribal nations, it's also a real moment for anyone who's, you know, not a heterosexual straight white male in the United States, you know, that this law, that we're going to pass a law to really say that your life is of value and we want to protect it. And your safety is a value, and the law should protect that. Which, if you understand the beginning of laws, it wasn't until 1976 that the first state changed its law, saying that, it used to be in most states in the United States, raping your wife wasn't a crime. In fact, it was just your right if you were a husband. And it wasn't until 1976 that those laws started to change. So I could talk for hours,
And
but
not until 1993 until that was taken away in all states.
right? So when you really understand law as it functions in the United States, was created in the United States to make women property. And so, we've worked really hard to change that, and there's still work to be done. I think in terms of what I hope my essay offers is, a perspective from tribal nations, from Native women who have survived the Andrew Jacksons. And even, I kind of talked about how some presidents that, for instance, everyone reveres Abraham Lincoln. Well, he was responsible for the largest mass hanging in the United States history of Dakota men in Minnesota, who had not committed a crime except for being Indian. And so right after he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he signed off on that. So, just knowing that a lot of times we have narratives about our American presidents and we hold certain ones up here, and just knowing that we've gotten through it before and we will keep getting through it, because that's what we do. We survive and we support one another through that.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that really brings up what I think also the spirit of the essay is. This isn't, and I noticed all three of us kind of talked about election night, but if you'll see, there's like quite a diversity of essays in the book in terms of really pulling out a lot of these different issues that have been going on for decades, centuries, and kind of having this moment, this breaking point right now where I think just as a movement we can reflect on these different moments. And I think that that's really, the other thing that motivated us to put the book together was really pulling from not just like licking our wounds and being like, how could this happen? How could this happen? But Sheryl Sandberg, or like whatever, like how could it happen? But like actually being like, no, like these are issues that have been, those first 100 days when he, like the DAPL stuff, when he just like signed that, like my heart got like, I had like a reporter who was embedded at Standing Rock and like followed that so closely, and to think and knowing the activists that had gone there and like just with the, swipe of a pen could just like undo all of that work, and kind of having that really like pull out from that and say like this moment means so much for so many fights for generations to come.
Jill Filipovich has an essay in the book that's about speaking to women in Ghana about the effects of the global gag rule. And that was that was like day 3 in office that he decided to do that. And so that was a thing that we felt really lucky that as much as we were putting this together quickly, we do have at least that one essay that was responding to something that Trump had already done.
Yeah.
And that all of it is, these were all written after the election, even if, we said, okay, you can sort of rework something, but we were like, we want your new original thoughts about what is happening and where do we go from here. And I think it's a really nice balance of things like Nicole's, very personal essay about getting through this election season, basically with her family, versus Mary Catherine's that gives us this incredibly wide historical perspective. And I think we need to be thinking about all of that to be able to kind of get our heads around this. So the only other thing that I want to say, though, is, obviously every one of you here is going to buy a book tonight. That's a given.
Thank you.
But if, all right, thank you. If for some reason you walk out of here without a book, Nicole's essay is up on longreads.com right now, and you should definitely go to look.
Breathtaking.
And is someone excerpting yours?
Not that I know of. No one's talked to me about
Someone
No,
might have asked her. I will talk to you,
I
but
think-
okay. Yeah. So we can't give details on that, but that is out there. Yes, Jess, what's up? Oh, talk to you. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Um,
Awkward.
Oh, yeah. Talk to a publication. Yes, this is the blessing and the curse of journalist friends. But all right, I think we can open it up to Q&As. If you want to come up to that mic with your questions, or if you even just stand up and yell, we can repeat it.
And also, if you're tweeting, which you should be, use the hashtag #NastyWomenLive.
Yes, we forgot. We're supposed to be telling you to tweet.
Tweet, tweet, tweet.
This is, yes. All right.
Hi, ladies. Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi there. I didn't think I was going to have a question, but over the weekend, 2 days ago, in fact, I found a whole new reason and a whole new lens to mourn Hillary Clinton's loss. And I need a little group therapy on this. I would love to hear your thoughts. I was at the March for Black Women here in D.C. and got talking to a reporter sent to cover it, and we ended up having a lengthy conversation. And after assuring me how much he loved Hillary Clinton and what a fan and how much he had hoped she would win, he then said, but a part of me thought, gosh, couldn't either of the parties have nominated somebody younger? And my mouth went to open, and I just couldn't. I couldn't. But what I thought, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts, was, are we ever going to elect a woman when you have people who on one hand say she's too old, but if Kirsten Gillibrand runs, it's going to be, well, look how young she is, and she's blonde, and she's cute, and she's young, and she doesn't know anything, and sure, she's a senator, but does she have the experience? Is there any middle ground in between the fact that an experienced woman, as Hillary was, like no other candidate, is fundamentally unappealing and unattractive to a large portion of the electorate? What do we do about that? Help fix it. Fix it. Please.
We'd be making a lot more money if we had that answer. No, I mean, I think I was on like a podcast last week and was asked exactly this question, like, what is your advice for women that want to run? And because I think one of the biggest things, like some of the things that people criticize the most about Hillary were due to the fact that she had the money to run, right? And like how many people have those kind of resources to even get there, and like, you know, for anyone that comes into privilege or wealth or money, like there's just negotiations you have to make, and those were the same things that like supposedly, you know, other candidates didn't have, even though the president is the worst example of that possible has ever walked the planet. But I do think, you know, I think one thing I've just been thinking about a lot is encouraging more women to run, and like, you know, actually talking about fundraising, because I feel like that's the biggest, like that's where the gap is happening. And it's, you know, and then like because I think the more we normalize it, the more like I can't argue with that guy. Like it's like I can't even talk to that person, right? Like I'm just like I can't like talk to, like, because that was a lot like in my newsroom, it was just like, yeah, no, Hillary's okay, but it's like, okay. Like it wasn't, you know, and I think that like, well, Shark actually said this on our podcast the other day, which I really like. Like, I think one of the things that hurts us in politics right now is Pamela Merritt, who's this phenomenal activist in Missouri. We're also doing a podcast that comes out tomorrow called Feminasty. And she's a amazing repro rights activist. In Missouri, she was like, I'm tired of us making superstars out of these politicians. Like, they're humans. They are messed up. Like, they're problematic. And that's just going to be true. I want America to fall in love with policy. And
it's something, and I'm going to take this because I'm fixated on the age portion of the question. And I think that that's one interesting thing about the younger people who were so bored with Hillary. Thinking, you know, if they were young teens maybe, or even younger than that, when Obama was elected, they've always had an example of a president who, like, there was a cult of personality around, and who you're supposed to really have these warm feelings about. And I mean, I should say I have probably more warm feelings for Hillary than anyone but like Chelsea. Like, I'm a crazy fan. But a lot of people don't feel that. And then I'm like, well, but who does? I have no warm feelings for John Kerry. I voted for him. And like, you know, I'm old enough that most of the election cycles in my life have been for, you know, a couple of white guys who can kind of do the job, and I didn't know who they were before, and now I do, or not, and this expectation that that someone should be, both politically pure, which is the inevitable problem on the left, and then also just this incredibly charismatic leader who is all things to all people, and then you bring gender into that, and you get the fact, like I keep thinking about, and forgive the crudeness, that Amy Schumer sketch about your last fuckable day, where they have Julia Louis-Dreyfus and exactly, and Tina Fey and Patricia Arquette are all there celebrating Julia's last fuckable day, and it's and she's around 50, and they're talking about they tell you that there is this moment where people don't see you as attractive anymore, so then you get into the character mother roles, whatever, and it just seems like basically that's the day you have to try to get elected president. That because if they look at you and they're thinking about sex first, you're not qualified. And if they look at you and think you look like a grandma and they can't imagine anyone ever did want to have sex with you, you're not qualified. And that's the thing that we can't seem to avoid as women. And we have literally the most experienced candidate ever versus Donald Trump. And here we are. I don't know if you two want to add some thoughts
and I would say
there.
the scariest thing for me is that that hasn't been the lesson that's come out of it either. That's and that also I think motivated the book is that we're not having our come to Jesus moment about the role that sexism played.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also I'm a lawyer, but also a playwright. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot about the narrative and about how that affects the law. And I see it, and I could give a million examples. But, if you look at the majority of the narratives that are consumed by Americans, which, a lot through TV, Netflix, HBO, Hollywood, thankfully we do have Americans that still go to the American theater. Please do that. Live theater is a treasure. But most roles for women are still in that their role is to be sexually desired. I mean, that's still the majority of the narratives that people are consuming. So I think until we can flip that, and so that, we're still working on that. Thankfully, we're still in the American theater, I know the vast majority of plays that are produced by American theaters are by white straight men and for white straight men, right? So where white straight men are the heroes. And I just, I don't think America's fully embraced the narrative that women are more than that. And I think some people have, but we have to keep culturally changing that narrative to be real about who we are and what we can do. So.
All right. Sorry, there's a line now. That's exciting.
Hi, y'all. In partial response, I guess, to the prior question, there's actually some really interesting research out there. By interesting, I mean depressing, that shows that our gender stereotypes are such that it's very difficult for women in either public office or private office to be seen as both competent and likable simultaneously. It's a very tough road to hoe, so thank you for everything you've done. So standing here as the white, cisgendered, straight male, who is, what is marginalization? I don't know. What can I do? Because, we are currently, as you say, the people for whom society has for so long catered to and sort of operated as though we're the status quo, that, that power is not going to be conceded without a fight. To partially paraphrase Frederick Douglass, what can I do to convince my fellow me's that, other people can wield power too, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it comes at the expense of us?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I hate to go with just if you see something, say something, but that is a really obvious place to start. And it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound easy. I feel like we all have those moments of regret from opportunities when we could have said something and tried to redirect the narrative or challenge something problematic, and maybe we didn't because, they're such a good person, or, their intentions were probably really solid, or, I don't know what to say. So, primarily first, educating yourself so that you have ammo when these things happen. And then really speaking up even if it's uncomfortable, because as uncomfortable as it might be for you, it's going to be you have less to risk and less to lose than whoever, maybe the woman or the person of color or the otherwise marginalized person in the room has to lose. Unfortunately, too, there are a lot of like white men who only listen to white men. So that's another group that's kind of really good for you to reach out to. But I'm not trying to make it sound easy or breezy. I know it's a lot, and allyship should also cost something sometimes. You know, it's not supposed to come free.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is just making sure that you're listening more than you're talking. And I mean, it's going to sound glib, but I genuinely mean read things like this anthology, go out, just because, I mean, it's a great place to start with, 23 different diverse voices, but you can also get it for free on the internet, and there are a zillion diverse voices that you can be going and listening to about what are your experiences, what did you need in various moments. All right, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you all for bringing inspiration.
Thank you.
Hi, Jess.
Hi. So I don't need to tell you all that the Democratic Party has the most progressive platform that we have ever had in history, and yet somehow that's getting lost, and it's getting mumbled in this conversation with identity politics. And so I was wondering if, looking forward, you all had thoughts on how we both amplify the fact that the Democrats actually have the greatest pro-equity, pro-justice platform we've ever had in the history of this country. And also, we should not be fighting about that.
Anyone want to tackle that one?
Really deep philosophical questions, yeah. Well, I would say the first, because I've been thinking about this a lot, because I get asked to talk about identity politics constantly, because I guess I've branded myself as but the kind of relationship to identity politics and policy. And I think right now one of the things that we're trying to balance is that people have really, especially the right, has like waged this war on identity politics where it just means like, you should have this because you're black. And it's like, no, that's like not exactly what it means. And what would it look like for us to actually go to a model of talking about policy through the lens of identity, right? And so instead of saying like, oh, we're all just Americans and we experience everything the same, it's like, no, when we talk about criminal justice reform, we have to talk about the role that, I think Indigenous women, that's in your essay, right? That Indigenous women are the highest rate of incarceration of any subgroup. So, what are the different kind of unique circumstances for that? And I think it's different than just being like this kind of like sense of identity where it's just like, I am a woman as a result.
Yes.
Where it's like, no, if I live in Alabama and I am a woman who's poor and can't drive to a Planned Parenthood, my life is different and differently impacted by anti-choice legislation. And so I agree with you that I think that the way that identity politics is being talked about on the left and the right is not exactly, that's not what our founding mothers meant.
Well, and you can't talk about equality without talking about identities. Like, that's bottom line. And white working class is an identity. White male is an identity. Like, these are the things, as a white person, I was very much, and I was literally brought up, taught, like, the correct answer is you are colorblind, you don't see it. And I had to unlearn that later and realize how offensive that is to say, well, I'm just going to pretend, because it's putting, dropping a veil of fake equality over, massive inequality. And so not being able to talk about that and acting as though like, and to see it coming from the left was driving me just bonkers of this, like, we got to go talk to these salt of the earth white working class Trump voters. And I'm like, or talk to literally anybody else. Like,
Hillary did win the working class vote,
Wait,
though.
yes,
I mean,
that
that's
is
the
also
other
true.
thing.
Yeah.
Another misnomer.
Yeah.
Fake news post-election.
I'm not sure if this addresses your question or not exactly, but like just as a person who's not white and a woman, like I looked at the exit polls from the election and I saw like how people like me voted. Like we voted for the Democrats. That doesn't necessarily mean we want them to take our votes for granted. Like we want to feel like they're going to fight for us, but the reason we turned out and voted in huge numbers the way we did was because we were eventually convinced. Maybe for some it was a lesser of two evils, but for a lot, I eventually felt like Hillary was going to fight for people like me, like fight for my family. So, I don't know. I do feel, I guess, a lot of brand loyalty to the Democrats, and it's not an unthinking loyalty. Like I do recognize how progressive this platform is. Of course, I always want to push them to do better. Like that's part of our job, right?
And that's the other thing I was going to say about that is that we can say and we should applaud that it's the most progressive platform ever. It's still not progressive enough, and that's, I mean, that's the valid critique coming from the left of the Democratic Party. What gets me nuts as a person who is more just kind of constitutionally pragmatic, and I mean as in how I am composed, nothing to do with the U.S. Constitution, that like I want to celebrate progress, and there are still a lot of people who are like, no, if it's not enough progress, blow it up and start over and do it right. And I don't have the answer to that, honestly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Back to
sorry.
Schoolhouse Rocks.
Right.
Got to share the Schoolhouse, how a bill becomes a law.
Right.
Got to go back to basics.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you guys for being here. I had to write down my question because, hold on, okay. So my question is about women and building power strategically without being martyrs, because we can talk to each other about this forever, but men are very dangerous, and we saw that this morning. Toxic masculinity and white supremacy are physically violent and dangerous. How do we get them out of positions of power? Because we don't care when a man outright brags about sexual harassment, and I write a lot about male feminism because I work with a lot of people who brand themselves as male feminists. And I have not met one who was not problematic, who I'm not suspicious of, who hasn't been a activist. And other non-men in the movement circles where I work, the only reason they know about these issues is through the power of social gossip. But that doesn't stop disingenuous people or even, outrightly sexist people from being in power. That just warns the people around us so that we can try and keep each other safe. So what do we do about the men who are in positions of leadership?
Fire them up.
I mean, it's hard. I don't want to make it all so personal because I feel like that's my answer to everything. But you kind of just start like you're doing already. It sounds like with a lot of patience, probably more than you should have to call on, right? But doing that private work in your social circles, in your families, a lot of us do it in the workplace, making sure that a woman's work and contribution and value is not overlooked, making it impossible to ignore. It's not really so much then toppling men from power, although I get that it has its appeal, as making sure women and their excellence are raised, and I would say that goes for other marginalized people too. It's hard because it's slow, incremental, and you don't see, when you're planting those seeds, you don't necessarily see how they're gonna bear fruit later. But the more I think about this and the more I obsess over it, the more I'm convinced that's where it starts, is kind of the way you're doing it. There's more we could talk about in terms of women running and politics, but yeah, I mean, there's 100 little ways we have to advocate for each other every day.
And I also think that's another answer to the white guy who's asking, that to be able to start that conversation about toxic masculinity among men and about, men talking to men is where you should be having the conversations about how patriarchy hurts men too, because it's a real thing. It's just that feminists bristle when you ask us to talk about it, because it's like, okay, yeah, but can we even discuss the fact that patriarchy hurts women before we get to the part where it hurts men? We've been trying that for decades, for generations. But it absolutely does, in terms of, one of the things that patriarchy does is really restrict the ways in which men are allowed to express themselves in public, even in private. It restricts the ways in which they're supposed to construct friendships. It restricts their ability to feel a full range of emotion. And all of that, when you combine that with the entitlement that then is conferred upon white men, can lead to toxic rage explosion, basically. If you don't get what you want, you've been raised to believe you should always get what you want, and you have no outlet for your anger, boom. And this is something I talk about. My last book was on rape culture, so I've done a lot of talking about this and talking to audiences, and I think we have to be able to recognize that that is a real thing and a real problem. And the problem is, much like the words rape culture, the words toxic masculinity make people start to go oh, you're just a feminist man-hater. And it's no, I don't hate men.
That's feminist master's student to you.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. But it's also, and every one of us, I'm sure, has said this as a feminist. It's because we expect more of men, and because we expect better for men, in terms of, I want little boys to be able to cry and to be able to talk about when they're sad, when they're happy, when they feel loving, all of those things that for generations we've been trying to get little boys to not feel. And I think that that's all a part of it. and then gun control.
Thank you guys for writing this. Can you hear me? So I am an American Muslim woman who is a daughter of Pakistani immigrants, and the night of the election was very traumatic for me, and for months I completely just shut down, because it just seems like even to this day, every day, there's something very depressing, very traumatic, very sad that's happening in the news, whether it's here in America, whether it's abroad. And so I feel like I'm stuck. And so I'm looking at you all and I'm asking, what is giving you guys hope? What keeps you going and what keeps you fighting? Because I feel like a lot of people are at this point where it's like, we can joke about it and be like, yeah, he's this and that, and it's funny what he's doing, but it's reality and it's happening. We can look at history, but what can we do now? So kind of personally also, like, what gives you guys hope? Why are you still fighting?
Yeah, I mean, so I had a similar feeling. I was actually on a plane from D.C. to Los Angeles the night of the election. I voted in the morning, and I was actually flying out. I had a play that was getting produced at a theater in Los Angeles, and I had to go out for a workshop of it. And I was kind of expecting Hillary to win. And so we're on this transcontinental flight, and people are getting these updates. I think some people were had their phone not on airplane mode. It's just weird because I don't know why. I didn't think much about it, but I just thought flight of people, D.C. to L.A., probably mostly going to be Hillary supporters. And it was this really weird moment of being on this plane and just hearing all these people woo, woo, all around me. And then they're like, Trump just won this state. And of course, they're also being really loud. And I look around, and the people that I can identify as people of color are trying to crawl under their seat. And I have to say that I fly a lot just for the work that I do, and I've never felt so claustrophobic and mentally I was like, am I gonna survive this plane ride without losing my shit, And because it just was, it's one thing for that to happen. It's one thing for all these people to be obnoxiously celebrating all around you. And they were trying to order more drinks and this was and they were being loud. And so that was really hard. And I kind of had this moment of I called one of my best friends who's one of my very, very best friends, and she's a justice on the Eastern Band Tribal Supreme Court and the Mississippi Choctaw Supreme Court. And we just for 2 hours, at that point it was 1 a.m. West Coast time, and we just sat on the phone and cried and talked. And then we just started talking, and I was that's when I went to it. I was but my grandfather survived the election of Andrew Jackson, and they had to feel, how did they feel when that happened? Because they were fighting for the survival of the nation. And Andrew Jackson's platform was, we will eradicate you. We will eradicate you. And just that moment when Andrew Jackson won and they realized, okay, this is the fight we have before us, and then that they never gave up. And then I could go into more detail about their particular story. They ended up trying to negotiate with Andrew Jackson and signing the removal treaty and were assassinated for it. And so it's a very traumatic story that I very much carry in my DNA, and I carry in my oral history lineage, and my grandma's buried 10 feet away from them in our family cemetery. And I guess I had this moment, and I imagine it sounds like your parents survived a lot for you to be here today, right? And I just thought my grandfathers didn't give up their lives so that when Donald Trump would be elected, I would say, that's it, I can't do it. And that for me was a real moment of hope, of just knowing that what my grandfather sacrificed so that I could be here today and face this. And that's what I go back to when I have these moments of this is too depressing, this is too much. I go back to that and I say, they survived this, or they did not survive this, but their children did, thankfully, because I come from them. And that's how I'm here today.
Thank you for that. I guess Beyonce gives me hope.
That too.
The fact that Lemonade could happen and Donald Trump can be president is this like, you know, split society that we're living in, and like I'm on the other side, like I'm on the Beyonce side, so I know I'm on the right side, and I feel like that does give me hope. But I mean, everyone in here gives me hope that like it's Monday, and it's like a book about feminism. We've been here before, haven't we? I think the protests, like, I was so angry, and I also, like, in my capacity in media, I wasn't marching, like, in the protests. I was covering them. But the protests and just seeing, like, even most recently, the protests, like, where, like, I met this young couple from Williamsburg, and they were like, yeah, we were going to go to the beach today, but then, like, these racists, like, were in North Carolina, and they just, like, changed their plans. And I was like, okay, all right. And they're like, we didn't have a choice. Like, we couldn't go to the beach. And I was like, okay. I was like, great. And that really gives me hope. And then I also think that there's a crop of organizers coming up right now that are so inspiring. Alicia Garza is actually in the book, and she's one of the founders of BLM. And she is a force to be reckoned with. And I think that people like that are kind of rightfully taking some time, but also really coming up and kind of getting some of the due that they deserve. And I think as they get more runway to really do, and as we kind of invest in more organizing work, that also inspires me a lot.
Yeah, I've got sort of a happy answer and sad answer. So I guess I will start with the harder part, which is basically just that I want to acknowledge that when we talk about we're going to survive this, the reality is not everyone is. And already we've lost people. We're losing people in Puerto Rico right now because, and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I can only imagine being a Muslim American, being an immigrant or the child of immigrants, and dealing right now with that just like bone deep fear for my life, for my safety, for my people. Like, that's the thing. I'm a white person who's financially stable, and as a bonus, I'm a dual citizen. I have Canadian citizenship. I'm going to be fine. But not everyone I love is going to be fine. Not everyone I care about just as a member of the human community is going to be fine. And so I just wanted to take a second to kind of acknowledge and honor that. In terms of what gives me hope despite that, I was working at a college last year when this happened, and it was so nice to go in and talk to these young people every day, sort of what Samita was saying, but just even younger than that, where they don't know exactly where they're going with their lives yet, but they are so fired up to fight this fight, and that was very helpful for me. And coming here, I was here for the march the day after the inauguration, and I didn't know how much I was going to be moved by it, I think, but we drove in and came in on the night before, so everybody's dressed up for the inaugural balls. And I'm just looking at all these people who are like, you're going to celebrate him. I'm just like, it was a good thing I was driving, because I was just like, if you slipped and hit the gas instead of the brake. But I did not mean that. But no, it was just very weird, because we were literally held up in traffic by that, and it was so striking, and sort of what you were talking about, Mary Catherine, where you're thinking that somehow I was thinking there aren't going to be people who are celebrating this, and then here they are. But then the next morning, I come down into my hotel lobby, and instead of all these people in tuxedos, it's all these people in their pink hats and with their protest signs. And then we still thought we were going to catch a cab at that point. We walked out the door, and it's just this mass of people, and just to think all of these people came here to say no, that really made me feel like, okay, we're not alone in this.
Sorry, I know we've been going on forever, but I think it's an important question. So I think, again, like the day after the election, I must have talked with like 30 people. Friends checking in on me checking in on them. I think we all need those connections. I think when we find them unexpectedly, it means a little bit more now. And I know that sounds really corny, but like I love the fact that you can sort of see people standing up for what they believe. And even if they weren't saying it or shouting it or having a sign, like you could tell from their lives and the things they are concerned about. what they care about and who they care about, that like they're with you. And I thought all that would kind of slow to a trickle after the initial shock of the election, but no, like, I mean, I checked in with a really good friend of mine last week, and just yesterday somebody messaged me on Google and was like, hey, just want to see if you're okay. Everything's like, you know what it's like. And like sometimes, you know, we all have really like bad days together, and sometimes other people are able to lift each other up. But I think finding those connections is important because they're ultimately a source of like hope too, and self-care, and like making you feel like you're not alone because you're not alone, you know, so.
Oh, we do have one more, and then we'll. Okay, great.
I'll make it quick, but thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited. I got a book already. So I guess my question has to do with family. I have this uncle whom I love very much. He's this white American guy, very hard worker, ex-cop, served on the police academy in Memphis, Tennessee for 15 years. He's been kind to me. I think he was the reason I was able to go to law school. But until this election, I realized he might be a little bit racist. And I'm dreading this Thanksgiving because I'm planning on having that conversation. You know, I love you, Uncle, but there are things. And how do you approach that conversation where you love somebody so much, but you want to tell them the way they're thinking about the world, the person they're supporting, are wrong or against 100% what you believe in?
Nicole.
That's like my whole essay in the book, basically. So it's really hard, and I'm sorry that you're dealing with that, and that it's a source of like stress and anxiety and like heartache for so many people I know right now, in all kinds of families. I don't have like great magic bullet advice, but I think first of all is like recognize that you can't do it all the time, and that when you need to take breaks, it's okay. And everybody has their different breaking point, and everybody has their different line. Like personally, there's nobody I've actually like cut off over the election, but what other people have in my shoes, I don't know, maybe. I don't think that's wrong. It's okay ultimately. I mean, I hope you know this. I don't mean it to sound condescending. It's okay ultimately if like there are people that eventually you have to let go of for like your own self. But if you really do want to try, I think, you know, do your research. Like I try to assemble like literally I'll have bullet points of like talking points that I want to go through. Yeah. I have like reputable sources I send, sources I consider reputable, like the New York Times and the Washington Post, like which not everybody considers reputable, but you know, like I try to back it up with facts, and I will go to like the personal story. I will say like either this is how this affects me, like as say a child of immigrants or a person of color or the parent of a child with a disability, or I'll say like this is how this affects my friend, or this is how this affects, you know, someone that you know and care about. Like I don't think you should have to, people shouldn't have to know someone like deeply or personally to empathize, but like I think for many it helps. Like it helps to have, it helps if your uncle thinks about that vote and then thinks about your face. Like it kind of sucks for you, yes it does, but like he should have to do that mental calculus. Like you should put it in his head if you can that like it's not a morally neutral decision. Like support for Donald Trump is not morally neutral. It's gonna come with a cost. Like it will affect relationships. That is totally fair to say. Yeah, how much it affects them is up to you, but I don't think there's anything you could do here that would be in the wrong. So, good luck.
Thank you.
And, I'm going to offer one more thing, not as a person of color, but as someone with a lot of racist white relatives. That just try to keep in mind that you are planting the seed, that you are putting that image in his head, because he's going to come back and be, oh, I don't mean it, you know, and you just kind of have to let that wash over you and cut it off wherever you think it's appropriate, but just remember it's going to be in his head whether he likes it or not.
And I'm planning to show him that it's coming from a place of love, not criticism. I think that's the most important thing.
If you didn't love him, you'd have given up.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right.